I'm about ready to go live. You are live. You are live. Hey, this is Sunday. I'm chilling out. I didn't even read the Bible today except last couple of chapters of Revelation. It totally blew my mind before. I didn't get done. I didn't get New Jerusalem or River of Life. But it was getting pretty bloody, messy. And I wanted rewards for reading through it, as promised in the first chapter and at the end of the whole book of Revelation. I'll tell you one thing. I'll never preach on it because it's too profound, too complicated, too mystical. Types and figures. I don't know what John was drinking on the Isle of Patmos, but that guy was handling a lot to relate to not only the seven churches, but our church today. Anyway, in past broadcasts, I've told you a lot about my law office. In Birmingham, Michigan. I'll give you the address. You got something to write on? Some of my, I don't know, underserved, or what do they call it these days? The blacks and the Mexicans and the poor. Takes them 10 minutes to go get a pencil and paper. Some of them. 725. Well, you got to put Jim Elsman. That's me. ELSMAN. 725 South Adams. Suite 182, Birmingham, Michigan, 48009. That's it. I've got a tennis match in a very short time. So I'm going to be curt and lawyers sometimes say de minimis. I'm not going to give you all the details of my life. You'd use it against me. Some of you would. And just like when I've consulted with men, they say, well, I should confess my sins. I tell them, not to your wife, okay? It may sound great, but you'll regret it. That's right. Keep it secret from your wife. I'm warning you. Don't think you're going to gain points ultimately. She's going to be stirring on those recitations for a long time. Some may not agree with me. But let's begin in the beginning. Keeping in mind this is only for my grandchildren. I don't expect you people to be thrilled with the details of my life. James Ellsman, an insignificant guy. So I've got one response from Pakistan to this whole broadcast series. I was born in a hospital. I was circumcised. I wasn't Jewish, despite the name. Kalamazoo, Michigan. That's where I was born. That's 150 miles from where I'm sitting. That was my hometown. Actually, I lived all my life in a town outside called Parchment. We made paper. I'll get to that. The oldest of what were to be 7 children. Do I remember anything? I'm 85. Do I remember anything about those early years? Yeah, once sliding on a carpet that was on varnish floor and crashing down, banged my head. I was probably crying about that for a few minutes. I could have been 2, 3. I don't remember the terrible 2s. My mother probably did. May she rest in peace, as well as my father. If I'm 85, you can count. They're gone to their reward, which should be a good one. They were good parents. Yeah, my psychologist wife, she's got a few comments. She thinks they mess me up in some ways, but that's traditional husband and wife talk. Spouses never think their spouse is perfect, to say the least. But my wife Janice has to live with me. Anyway, by the time I get to 5, something big time happens. I was born on September 10, 1936. Little did I know that in those years, Hitler was on the march. Remember Kristallnacht? No, you don't. You weren't alive in 38, 39 when he started persecuting Jews. But in 1941, when I was 5 years old, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And I remember that. My dad didn't have 7 children at that time, but he hauled us to a little radio where FDR was going to address the whole nation. This will be a day that will go down in infamy. Japanese Imperial forces struck Pearl Harbor. Oh, they sunk our big battleships, Arizona, whatever. Fortunately, the carriers were not in harbor on that Sunday, but caused a big commotion in my family and, of course, trauma for me as a little boy. So that's how I started. And, of course, during the war years, I had my own private machine gun that my dad made out of some tube. And I did what Americans did. They collected metal. I even collected milk pods. And we were told that they were used in life jackets. I never verified that. And then, of course, the war ended on both fronts eventually. It ended with the Japanese by the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I later in life went to Japan and saw Hiroshima. Wow. And that was just like a firecracker compared to what we have today in nuclear weapons. Those were atomic bombs. But are we any different today? Putin is threatening the use of nuclear weapons. You can say, well, battlefield size, who knows? Guy is half nuts. And he hasn't been shot yet by his generals. Yeah, his generals are not going to get away unscathed if they even live. I mean, the United States of America has its own nuclear fleet hiding in subs below the surface. We can threaten back. But Joe Biden, he's too busy attending press association gatherings. Last night I saw it. To be bothered. He's not even funny. He shouldn't have spoke. He spoke, and a comedian was the master of ceremonies. It was a disaster. When we have such a serious war going on with people suffering casualties in Ukraine, I think we should be respectful enough not to be laughing at jokes. Living high on the hog in the United States of America. That's just my opinion. Anyway, we're back to my timeline. At 7 years old, I owned a paper route. There was this stupid guy that had the paper route. I started off by peddling for him. He didn't pay me enough, but I just stayed loyal. And finally, he got tired of collecting. He had to go up to the door, knock. Collection, Kalamazoo Gazette. You got to get your butt out of bed on a Saturday and do that, because on the other days of the week, you're peddling. And some people, they run out on you. People change houses all the time, you know. And they owe you $13 or whatever, but to a paper boy, that was big money. So he quit. The Kalamazoo Gazette had to have the papers delivered the next day, or they'd have complaints coming in. So I step in and say, I can handle this. I was 7 years old and not too big either. So I had a checking account. After all, the Gazette has to be paid for their papers every week. It was at that time. So I immediately tell my customers, hey, look at this weekly collection. There's a bunch of nonsense. I'm always pounding on your door on a Saturday when you might have other things to do, making love with your wife or whatever. I knew their sensitivities way back then. And why don't we just do this? You pay me 3 months in advance, and I won't bother you on Saturdays, ringing your doorbell, disturbing your first day off of the weekend. I prospered. I saved $8,000 by the time I was 17 and lived a pretty good life. I bought my bikes, whatever I wanted. But we were a poor family. My dad was a salesman of paper. I call him a character out of Death of a Salesman. That's a play by Arthur Miller. Or that's all he had in life, his clients, customers. It was a big thrill for him to go to trade shows in Chicago. Kalamazoo was 150 miles from Detroit, 150 miles from Chicago, right in the middle. Detroit was such a car city that they didn't have other businesses. It's never been the business town that Chicago is. So there I was with a moneymaker. My friends said, Jim, why can't you come play on Saturday? I have to collect. I'll meet you at 3 o'clock and play a little ball. That's about what it was like. And I don't want to take all the credit. My mom would help me pedal by driving the car. Let's say it's snowy, 6 inches of snow on a Sunday morning. I wasn't going to go sled those papers all over, throw them on the porch. They had to be carefully delivered so they didn't get wet. We didn't even have plastic sleeves in those days. But I sure could fold them in different sizes. When you're a paper boy, you have time to invent. The triangle fold. Well, let me not teach you too much. It's a hard way to make a living. And these days, mature adults have huge routes. They don't even rely upon children anymore. No children want to work that hard. The work ethic of today's teenager is not impressive. Back to the home. I had 6 brothers and sisters. I was the oldest. I was the boss man. But on the other hand, with that comes responsibility. So who does my dad choose to go up and paint the house while he's working in the paper sales business? Me. Well, Dad, aren't you worried that I'll go up to the pinnacle and fall off the ladder or spill a bucket of paint? Son, I need your help. It's a big family. You got to help me. I helped him. I did the hard, dirty work. He rewarded me. I still have memories of going out to shoot my BB gun with him and going out to shoot my .22. We had a river that flowed through town, the Kalamazoo River. We didn't know anything about pollution back then. The paper mill that he worked at poured their chemicals into the river, killed the fish. It's since been restored. As I speak to you in 2022. Indeed, May 1st. Used to be an important day. Maybe it is in communist countries. They have parades or something. I know Putin is going to have a military parade on maybe May 8th because it's a good day to show off his weapons, as if we don't know about his weapons and the morale of his troops. Putin, just don't mess around with the United States of America. We're not speaking softly and carrying a big stick for nothing. It's best to fight wars that way. Don't tell people what you've got. This is a good way to play poker, etc. Same when practicing law. Keep some in reserve. Well, in 6th grade, I started to be, maybe a little bit before that, I used to win spelling contests in grades before 6. But in 6th grade, I had a coach that was also my teacher in this little town called Parchment. you didn't expect much out of the educational system, but I got it. This teacher, Don McCook, he played defensive end for Western Michigan University of Kalamazoo, and then got his teaching degree and came to our school, Parchment Junior High. He used to beat up on me. It wouldn't be tolerated today if I was giggling or pulling some girl's pigtails. He'd say, "Mr. Ellsman, come up here." It was terrifying. He used to put me over his knee, take a board, and whip my ass with such sting suffered by me that I would have tears coming out of my eyes as I walked back to my seat. I'd go home and tell my parents. They'd say, "Good, you deserved more." They never criticized that teacher. Today it could not be done. That's called child abuse. But that's how different we are. I'll opt for the old days. I shaped up real fast, and he taught me poetry. You wouldn't think a defensive end for Western Michigan would be steeped in poetry, but he was. This is the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, 18th of April, 75. Is that true? I don't know. I never checked it. April 18th of 1975, is that when Paul Revere made his ride? Well, I learned it in poetry. Ozymandias, child of scorn. Whenever Richard Corey went downtown, we people on the pavement adored him. He was a gentleman from soul to crown, clean favored and imperially slim. And he was always quiet when he walked, and he was always something when he talked. And still, we thought of everything to make us wish that we were in his place. So on we worked and waited for the light and went without the bread and cursed the meat. And Richard Corey, one calm summer night, went home and put a bullet in his head. How long ago was that? 75 years. I still remember it. And many other poems. This is not a literature class. What a guy. And then after school, we would face little burbs like Parchment surrounding Kalamazoo, Millwood, Oakwood, Paw Paw, whatever. And he'd be my coach. I was a second baseman and a pitcher, but primarily I was second baseman. I still have horrors. The time I goofed up a double play. I could turn the pivot. My shortstop, Dave Robertson, he flips to me. The runner's coming down. I got him by a mile. And I overthrew Ward Pipple. That was his name, the first baseman. I always say he could have leapt a little higher. But it was my fault. And my basketball career was pretty successful as well in junior high. I would, what today would be called a basket suck. In other words, I was a ball hawk. When those guards from the other team would come down, my intent was, I'm going to steal the ball from them. And I'd fake on one side of them, they'd come around the other side, and I'd be already off toward the basket, having stolen the ball. I had another forward, Fred Watterson. He'd try to do the same thing. And I was the high point scorer. And when I played baseball, I had the highest average, but I didn't hit for power. I wasn't very big. So no home runs out of me, just little dingers. Frankly, I was a little bit blessed. I was the leadoff man, so I was expected to get on, and I got on. My average was something like 660. But we didn't play many games. After a while, those averages come down if they start off high. That was junior high. At this time, I was also in a house with an unfinished upstairs. My dad was always working on it. But I slept in a bed with two other brothers. Yeah, it was a double bed. What did we use for blankets? Paper mill felts from the paper mill that was in our town. I don't know how my dad got them. He wasn't a thief. Probably bought them at discount or something. Can you imagine sleeping with two other brothers? And when we got up in the morning, because our upstairs was not finished, just some rock lath on the walls. I used to have to stand on the register, the heat register, to stay warm enough to put my pants on. But all the time, my bank account was growing, and I wanted to get a college education because my dad was always railing against college educations. Son, you can't learn everything in life from books. I questioned that. And ultimately, he lost his job because there was a merger of his paper company and another paper company. And he took the money that he and my mom had saved up and started a coin laundromat and a restaurant at the same time. I helped him by then. I was a lawyer, but we'll work up to that. So, high school. It would have been wise of me to just go to the public school. But no, I got an offer from Western State High, which was affiliated with Western Michigan. And I got to check the time because of my tennis match. And it was too good to turn down. Come to get this special education because Western teachers are going to experiment on you. I didn't care. So there I go, Western State High. I had to go 4 miles every day to get there. It doesn't sound like much today, but how was I going to get from Parchment, where I grew up, to Western State High on the other side of Kalamazoo? I had to hitchhike, ride in the back of cars, and I meant in the back of Model Ts. Some of my buddies had a Model T. They didn't have room for me inside. I rode outside. I never complained. Glad to have the ride. Now at this stage, I'm starting to become aware of girls. Oh my goodness. I'd go through the corridors of Western State High, say hello to everybody. I was a fairly friendly guy naturally, but these girls with body figures, that were unlike boys. They attracted me, and I started dating them. Whew. But the parchment boys were always considered pretty knowledgeable because, well, we were just country boys. And at Western State High, it was children that have gone there from kindergarten through. I entered in the 10th grade. A little bit tough socially at first, but finally I was discovered by some teachers. Hey, you can write. You can write. I was never very good at math or sciences. You can write. Shows you what an encouraging teacher can do for you. I couldn't be paid much attention at home because there were 7 kids to feed, clothe, educate. All right, I got to get on with it. I think I was 9th out of 100 in my high school class after a rough first year because I had to adjust to all this wealthy kids around me. And I wasn't an athlete that got letters. And I had to work. I worked at office supply stores so successfully that the owner, Mr. Doubleday, had a daughter that he wanted me to be interested in. So I used to get invitations to take her to Lake Michigan. She was a pretty girl. But you know, sometimes God's got a woman for you that is planned out 2 or 3 years ahead. We'll get to that. How I met my Jan, to whom I've been married for 61 years. Think that's easy? How many of you have been married for 61 years? You got to be very old and very wise and know how to keep your mouth shut. Marriage is a hoot. So I had $8,000 saved up from the paper route, and I wasn't going to go cheap. I wanted a good education, despite what my dad said, because he never had a year of college. Nobody in my family had ever had any college. It was unheard of. I wanted the University of Michigan. I could pay the tuition, room and board, books, and I got a Regent scholarship, which was basically given to anybody that wanted to go there. I can't remember that I was academically superior, although I did well in high school. University of Michigan. I still remember my mommy driving me off to my freshman year, crying. I was leaving home. I was living in a dormitory. Yeah, first year, I lived with a smoker, Charlie Steiner. Back in those days, there was no rule against smoking. Fortunately for me, Charlie wanted to be a fraternity boy, so he pledges Phi Gam. Well, he was gone in more ways than one. He never made it to the second academic year. You don't study, you don't survive in college. You can be even very smart, but you can't fail to go to class or fail to take a few notes and still survive. because exams come, and then the teacher expects minimal regurgitation. My other roommate, we had a triple. He was gone. He was a buddy of mine from Western State High. Nice guy named Ron Kilgore. I think he's still alive. As a matter of fact, I have a high school reunion upcoming at the tail end of June, beginning of July, that weekend. June 30th must be close to the end of a month. All right. I'm very successful in college. I try out for the Michigan Daily, which is the school paper, the largest school paper in the United States of America. 30,000 copies a day, and soon I am editorial director. I sneak into Cuba and get a story of Castro in the mountains. Batista almost kills me. I end up in a prison called Moncado Barracks at the other end of the island from Havana. I'll tell you about that story someday. And I also, being historically minded, thought our paper could do a lot better job in covering international, national news. So even before I went to Cuba in the fall of '57, Eisenhower integrated the first Southern school called Little Rock Central High, Arkansas. I was there. I talked a girl out of her library card, which was the way to get past bayoneted either 101st Airborne or 82nd Airborne, I can't remember. Eisenhower's troops forcefully integrated 9 children. I snuck in, got a picture of Jefferson Thomas, the opposite of our president, Thomas Jefferson. Sold it to Time Life for $200, paid for my way. And that was college. Now, I could have gone to law school right at the University of Michigan, and that would be 7 straight years at Michigan. I didn't want that. I was already a born-again Christian from an experience at 14 at some Methodist Sunday school camp. You swim a little. They had a traveling evangelist come in. I accepted the Lord. That didn't mean that I didn't sin thereafter, but I still hang on to that as if anybody asks me, what was the date of your salvation? I said, I don't know the exact date. But here's what happened to me. About like that blind man in Acts. All the Jewish Sanhedrin and Pharisees and Sadducees asked, how did the blind man see? The blind man was questioned too. He just said, I don't know, but once I was blind and now I see. Okay, passing on before I have to serve. Serve tennis balls. It's the 1st of May. And it's a sunny day in Michigan, ultimately. Rainy this morning. I was offered a Rockefeller Brother Fellowship to Harvard Divinity School. The idea was that you take men, no women at that time, you take men who are going to be into business or law or medicine or engineering, but they're leaders. And you give them a taste of divinity school, and 2/3 of the time they go on, become ministers, pulpit ministers, maybe professors of theology. I bid, but I told the interviewing committee, you guys are so stupid to bet on me because I'm going to law school, which I did. Law school, it was fairly easy. I was married through half of it, had a baby, served as a Russian translator for one of my professors. Russia at that time was just starting to have a civil society. So they actually had a legal code on different subjects, property and injuries and whatever. But I had to work. I couldn't be law review. Kissing up to professors. No. I worked. I finished top quarter. Michigan law. I got the pictures right back there on the wall. And then having a child to feed. The question is, where do you go for work? I interviewed Chrysler Corporation. They turned me down. I get a couple of extra grades in my senior year, an A in antitrust and an A in trials and appeals. My wife says, why don't you send them another letter? Tell them those grades, see if their needs have changed. Sure enough, they said, you're hired. I'm not going to tell you how much, but it was above Wall Street, what Wall Street was paying lawyers. I took it. Learned a lot about how corporations are run, which has helped me in my law career because when I sue corporations, I know how to find the ghosts. What's in the files? How do you find the files? What are the titles in the corporation? One of the first things I ask for is the organization chart. They get nervous at that stage. They sometimes just settle right then. Okay, for the last roughly 60 years, I've been practicing private law. I built a law firm, 15 men. I've had 3 or 4 women. In the firm. And my practice now, and for the last decade, has been on behalf of the little guy in America. So I practice class action plaintiff law. A lot of people have been hurt. You sue for all of them at the same time. That's called a class action. Concurrent with that professional responsibility, I've been preaching on campuses, going to the University of Michigan and with Jim Weber, Brother Jed, go out in front of we call it the diag, with a blue M engraved in the sidewalk. And, for example, tell the students, You're a bunch of sinners going to hell. And it's not your fault. And then they say, whose fault is it? And Jim Weber says, your parents. What? How dare you insult my parents? And a riot starts and campus police. Where's my whistle? Yeah, I've had a few whistles on me. I've been arrested a lot of times preaching. I was arrested in South Africa. I've been all over the world preaching and playing tennis. Sometimes I got a 2-for-1. Go to a country, play a little tennis, like in South Africa. End up hunting in the center of South Africa and preaching in Cape Town and helping evangelists in Joburg or Johannesburg. My wife's still alive. I'm still alive at 85. And that's the story. I've cut it short because I got to not stand a guy up that's going to be on my court. Hoping to play some singles on hard court tennis under the spring sun. It's been my pleasure to take your time today, and I wanted to get this down for my grandchildren. A little autobiography. Praise the Lord. Jesus, thank you for my life. My steps are ordered by you. Take me and use me for your kingdom's sake. In Jesus' holy name, I pray and give you all the glory. Amen.